Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.
The interview series Reflections in Time was begun by the late Professor Paul Borghi more than 20 years ago. This new series continues Paul's work and is dedicated to his memory. My name's Jack Newton. I'm retired now, but I'm still active as a professor emeritus. I've been on the faculty of UN Omaha since 1960 and served for 20 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. I worked closely with Professor Borghi in the development of his original interview series and can think of no more fitting tribute to him than to continue this work. It's a beautiful day in spring, late May. The year is 2004, and I have as a guest today Dr. Shelton Hendricks, who's currently Professor of Psychology and Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, a job that I just told you I held for a number of years. Shelton, welcome. We're glad to have you here in the studio.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's begin by learning a little bit more about you. You're currently Professor of Psychology, as I said, and you obviously served in all the faculty ranks since you came here, beginning as an assistant professor, ending as a full professor. So we know that about you, but how about a little bit of your early background? I know that you went to school in New Orleans. Is that where you grew up?
Yes, I grew up in New Orleans, and I attended Tulane, and I got all three of my degrees there. So.
You went to secondary school there, too?
Yes, I did. In a public high school. Yeah.
Okay. Anything memorable about your early years?
Well, yeah, I guess some of my happiest years were at graduate school. I really enjoyed that, and I got into deciding to go to graduate school was a sort of a last-minute thing my senior year. I took a course in physiological psychology and really fell in love with the whole idea.
How did you get involved with psychology to begin with?
As I think, like many people, even today do, it's almost a default major. You know, I was interested in science, but I was a little bit intolerant of labs, and psychology kept a couple of courses I took. I really got interested, but I really had no intention of being a psychologist. It was more of a liberal arts major, and actually I was all set to go into the Navy upon graduation, and then took this course and said, you know, this would be a lot more fun. So.
Well, you mentioned a course in physiological psychology. Maybe we ought to stop for just a second and talk about psychology, because what you do is not what a lot of people think of psychology as being. Could you what you're doing is a lot of people would think of as being biology instead of psychology.
Yeah, and it's I guess it's a lot of biology, and in many ways it's become in recent years a part of this new discipline called neuroscience. The notion of physiological psychology, it's the biology of behavior, and the biology of cognitive function as well. And more I guess more so than most other areas of psychology, the focus is often on non-human animal research. Often involves a lot more of other of the basic sciences, particularly chemistry and biology.
Mm-hmm.
So it tends to be a very interdisciplinary kind of area of study.
So you're not the kind of psychologist that listens to people's problems, at least not as a psychologist. You may do that as a dean these
As
days.
a dean, I do it. And actually, later on in my life, when I worked at UNMC, I did get into doing clinical trials.
That's at the medical center here in Omaha, and we'll talk about that a little later. I think we don't want to miss talking about that because that's an important aspect of what you do.
But yes, I got, and mostly I've done work on rats, and that's been my my research focus.
Remember, some people would think that your work with rats, particularly, I remember when you first came here, was a little different.
Yes.
Can you want to explain why I put it that way?
Well, my interest was primarily the sexual behavior of rats, and within that, my focus was on how the brains of male and female rats develop differently to yield their different behavioral patterns. And so it involved a number of things, a lot of treatments and manipulations during development, and then spending many hours watching their sexual behavior, which I guess is what I got a reputation for, is just sitting in there watching rats do what rats do.
Well, we know that's what they do because there are a lot of baby rats born.
I think there's still some descendants of my original rats living in Arts and Sciences Hall, but I'm not really sure of that.
In cages, I hope.
No, there are no more in cages in Arts and Sciences Hall.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I forgot about that. They're all over in Allwine Hall now, aren't they? Well, you I know you came to Omaha in 1969, but you got your PhD earlier than that.
I got it in '67.
Yeah, and what did you do in the intervening 2 years?
I was at Tulane. I was I guess my first year I was a research associate, and then my advisors, Arnie Giral was my advisor, and his wife was on the faculty as well, and she became seriously ill that year, and so they asked me to cover for her the next year. So I taught. Then at that time, Tulane had separate classes for men and women in two different colleges. So I taught women intro psych for a year at Sophie Newcomb College, and so I continued to do work, research work in the same lab where I'd done my doctoral work.
And then you came to Omaha.
Yes.
I should perhaps, in the interest of just being well, truth in advertising or something here, I should mention that when you came here, I was chairman of the psychology department. And at that time, it was a very small department. We only had, we just started recruiting people, and the year before you came, we'd recruited a number of people. But for practical purposes, I was kind of on my own in doing the recruiting of new faculty.
Yes.
And so, so I had a little bit to do with trying to entice you to come to Omaha.
Yes. You were the first person I met here, and
so let's talk about that a little bit. How did you eventually end up here?
Well, there are a number of criteria I had for looking for a job. One of them, I wanted to work for a state university. I had
You'd just become that.
Had just become that.
Right.
I was looking for a place that had a medical center nearby, and that clearly happened here. And I was looking to be in a different part of the country just to give it a shot. And
I thought you'd like to try a place where you had snow on the ground.
Snow on the ground now and then, and other things like that. And so it looked like a good place, and the UNO at that point sort of looked like a boom town. I mean, it looked like it was just exploding.
It was.
And it was.
We had a 25% increase in our student body just the year before.
Yeah. So it was a obviously the facilities left a lot to be desired, but you had to sort of look to the future.
Right.
And it looked like a place.
And that was one of my selling points.
Yes.
When I tried to recruit you.
I remember that. That this place is growing like mad, and
right.
it's going to. And so those were enticing things, and to be part of a department that's in development, that was exciting too.
Well, you've told us a little bit about your first impressions of the university when you came here, but what was the campus like in 1969?
Well, obviously it was a lot smaller. We had, I guess, Allwine Hall was under construction,
right?
And so. There was everything else except very few functions was in what's now Arts and Sciences Hall. I think it was called administration then.
Right.
And including the Chancellor's office, I think all the Dean's offices.
Yeah, we had the engineering building as well, and the library, but that
physics
was about it.
was in engineering, and engineering, I believe that was, and math. Math was
in
engineering.
Yeah, they were there.
And the computer center was in engineering. I remember that. But anyway, so there were just departments upon top of departments within Arts and Sciences Hall. I mean, and most faculty were sharing offices with each other. There were functions just jammed all over the place. It was parking was a zoo in many ways. I mean, with a place had grown, the parking just was spilled over all over the neighborhood.
That was a perennial problem for a good many years.
And we hope still a problem, but it's nothing like what was confronted then. I live in the neighborhood, and it's been, I mean, I remember my first years here, I would get up in the morning to go to work, and there would be streams of cars parked way past my house, and you see all these students walking toward campus, and so it was, and that just doesn't happen anymore. So it was very crowded. It was very, very much in the throes, trying to understand how it was going to function within this University of Nebraska system. I mean, all the things had not been worked out.
That's right. It was only in the year before, really, that we had become part of the University of Nebraska system. Yeah. Before that, it was a municipal University of Omaha.
Yeah, so there was a lot of chaos in how the place was to be governed, how people were to function. It was a very different, big transition.
Did you get a chance to participate in that at all, or as a new faculty member, was this something you left to other people?
Mostly to other people. I didn't understand all the arguments that were going on about, I guess there were some campus prerogatives that were being, they were, I guess early on my work in the graduate program was the one that got me most into systems issues, and since that eventually, that notion of a systems graduate faculty that developed over the next few years was that, I won't say the name of the department, but I remember once I was on the executive graduate council that sees over the whole system, and we had a proposal from what is now one of our most eminent departments at the university for a master's degree program, in which they'd already conferred degrees. And then they asked, and the chair of the department was there talking to us, and they said, well, but how many members of the graduate faculty do you have in your department? And he said, well, actually none. And so that was some of the degree of chaos that was going on.
Well, what was the curriculum in psychology like back then?
It was a little bit more prescribed, I think, than it is now. I think we used to require 2 advanced laboratories for a major. And we dropped that. We've added what we've added is a research methods course over the years. I remember the most interesting kind of thing was the what we call Psych 102, that second semester
That was my invention.
I know, and a fascinating course which I got involved with because with the lab, because it also had a lab, and that lab I think continues to be the most popular course in the psychology curriculum.
That's the lab where we give each student a rat, and
they're graded on their rat's behavior, and that is always a very odd concept for them initially, but they really get into it, and as I said, and most of the rats do well, and they get good grades, and so they feel good about it. But they really appreciate the chance to get to work on their own in a lab that early in their careers.
Yeah, I thought that was important when we initiated it.
And I think it continues to be one of the reasons that we have so many majors.
But it's expensive.
It is expensive in time, but it continues to be.
We have small, individually supervised laboratories, and we're very, very strict about ethical treatment of the animals.
Oh yeah, they get that.
So this takes time and supervision.
No, it's a time-consuming course.
What was the faculty like back then?
The faculty was sort of, as I recall, there were some elder statesmen, and you, and then all these young upstarts, and it was so it was a faculty very much in transition. I mean, the young faculty had. I remember one of the issues that went on for a year was to allow graduate students to come to department meetings, which now you probably couldn't drag them there. But in the 60s or 70s, they thought that important things were going on they should be aware of. And we had big discussions that went on. And finally, we had a vote, and students were allowed to come to. So they came twice, I think. And then realized they had better things to do. But that was, so there was a traditional view, and then there was the other change was that the younger faculty and you were interested in research as a major function of the faculty, whereas the older faculty were not in that tradition, and so there was a transition going on there. But they were generally supportive of it.
Well, you mentioned a few moments ago a department that didn't have any members of the graduate faculty, and that was one of the things that I took pride in, was that our faculty in psychology were members of the graduate faculty, and if they weren't, they didn't last.
No, I think we were certainly the first department to initiate that as a tenure requirement.
Well, the faculty was small, but it started growing about the time you arrived.
Yes,
and
it was growing
grew
rapidly.
Fairly large by the.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time recruiting.
Right.
And I think we added 2 or 3 the next year, and just about every year we added 2 or 3 people for quite a while. So it was.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, as a department chair back then, I took the most pride in, was that we were able to recruit pretty good people, and you know, I'm especially proud of the fact that you're here and Ken Deffenbacher's here, and you know, those are that really changed the face of the department, certainly, and probably the college and the university.
Yeah, no, it was a big change, and it was fun to be part of it.
I can't remember now, when you first came here, did we have a course in physiological psychology, or did you have to develop?
No, you had a course.
I'd probably written up a
well, there'd been somebody here before who had.
Oh yes, Dave Schachter.
Yeah, and so he, in fact, not only had a course, he had a very sweet deal. He had written a course, a couple of courses that hardly had any students in them that he was teaching, but.
I didn't recruit him, incidentally. My predecessor did.
I never knew him, so. But there was no lab. That was eventually added to make it into a lab course. And then and when I came here, it was a combined graduate-undergraduate. And when we created the doctoral programs, we also created a separate graduate course in the discipline. And so it's changed, and really I don't think there's been much change to our offerings. And we changed the name. It's now called behavioral neuroscience, which is more in line with what things are called these days. But the essence of it's remained the same.
And then things started changing. Wasn't much more than a few years after that, 1973, that I left the department to move into the dean's office, and you took over as department chair.
Yeah, I became department chair. That was, if you'll recall, that was supposed to be for 1 year that you were going to be interim dean, because and that obviously the college then chose you to be permanent dean, and I wound up being chair. I think for I guess it lasted for about 7 years, and it was still a growing department.
Yeah, you did a lot of recruiting too.
Did a lot of recruiting. Some of it was replacements more than new positions, but we particularly, I think, the industrial organizational program, I think, really took off at that time. We had difficult keeping faculty in that area, but we had several good faculty in and got good service from them for a few years, and really got that program, which is, I think, still our biggest enroller in graduate school.
Yes.
And then the school psychology department area developed more as we were able to add more people in that area.
Now, both of those were high demand areas in the city because, well, obviously we have a fairly good sized school system, and the tendency was to hire school psychologists back then. So
still, yeah, they're still in big demand, and they were in demand then. And I think we have a pretty, we're pretty proud of the school psychologists we have practicing in the whole region now. From our
and the same is true of the industrial organizational area. This we're really the only game in town that produces strong industrial organizational psychologists.
No, and they are in big demand.
Yeah, for personnel work and all other many training, many different sorts of things.
Well, one of the things that happened while I was chair was my wife decided to look at another career, and so she went through our master's program in IO psychology while I was department chair, and I often had to limit our dinner time conversation. I said, no, I don't want to hear that. But she got some real good training in that area and had a really good career after graduating. So.
She worked at the medical center.
She worked all the time in health science. She worked for what was then Mercy Hospital, which is now part of Allegiant, and then she worked at UNMC, and eventually was the quality officer for UNMC.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, we've talked a little bit about your administrative responsibilities as department chair. Let's talk a little bit about other administrative responsibilities you've had. Just a few years ago, you were the what is it, Dean for Graduate Studies?
Yeah. That was only a 1-year stint, and but it seemed like a really, and it was a very nice fit for me, because they also had the role as Associate Vice Chancellor for Research, and I'd had a considerable amount of experience with grants and contracts and research functions, and so I felt I could do that job, and I thought I knew graduate programs well, and it's also a job that graduate deans have very little direct power, so it's a job that requires you to...
They don't have big budgets.
They have no... They have such easy budgets to manage, and they have... But so you have to accomplish things by talking to people who do have budgets, and I think that's something I could do, and without trying to interfere with programs. And I think so. It was very enjoyable. And I thought I did a lot of things at the time to help us move forward in our research function, and like. But during that time, we had John Flocken decided that he was going to step down, and as Dean of Arts and Sciences. Right. And at one point, it was going to be rather precipitous. his wife was having some health problems, and so they were looking. I'd be at 2 weeks or so, and they were talking to me about being interim at that point. But then he saw it clear that he could finish the year, and so they did a search, and I eventually applied, and so I.
What motivated you to apply for the dean's job?
Well, a lot of people said I'd be able to do it, which is a good motivator, I guess. The other one, I've had a really interesting, focused research career, but something that I have a very abiding love of is the liberal arts, as an educational thing, as a group of faculty, and so that was a big attraction. That I think that always needs defending, it always needs strengthening, it always needs making the case. And
that's maybe a bit of a digression, but if I remember correctly, you served on one of the committees that was concerned with general education requirements.
Yeah, and that's one of the times I got really interested in, because that committee came up with some interesting recommendations, but what was really interesting was the 2 years we spent studying what is the core, how do we give an educated person a core that will reflect what we think an educated person knows and his experiences are going to do. So that committee was a fascinating committee, and we spent a lot of times having discussions. Should there be a foreign language requirement? This is a university-wide thing, so it wasn't. I mean, we had health phys ed requirements. Should there be a health? Should there be this? Should there be this? What kind of math should people? And these were really fascinating discussions. So that was a really interesting committee.
And some frustrations, I'm sure.
Oh,
too.
Sure. We
especially when you talk about a math requirement.
Well, or any requirement, there are objections to every requirement. There are constituencies to every requirement, and some of it is compromise. And obviously, and in fact, our recommendation was compromised in the process, but still I think we wound up with a vastly improved fundamental set of requirements for UNO students. And so that was just a fascinating 2-year process for me. And
that's one of the things that comes up every few years. Well, maybe not. Maybe few years is exaggerating a little, but every decade or so, anyhow. Is there anything in the works along looking at general education requirements again now? Or?
Well, I don't think we just did it in the college.
Oh, okay.
And
I'm a little bit separated from that.
One of the first things I initiated is let's take another look at one of the reasons I did it was not so much to change it, but with the new ways in which certifications are done with this outcomes, we need to more effectively articulate what is our intention of the requirement.
Now, you're talking now about the North Central Association's regular 10-year evaluation of the university, where they look at you to see whether you're doing a good job or not.
Yeah, and now, they used to ask you, well, you teach them math with a PhD in math. Now they don't care about that. They said, what kind of math do they know when they come out, and why should they know it?
Yeah.
And so we went through in the college a review of it with an articulation. One of the things we did was realign some of the programs, which we moved history into the humanities and moved communication into the social sciences. I thought it was a better fit. We have, other than that, we sort of streamlined the distribution requirements, and then we did add what we call a second quantitative course. That is, I don't know if you recall, but now we have a basic English course plus what we call a third writing course appropriate to the major. Now we've said you have this basic math requirement, and then you have to have another quantitative course that is determined by your major. And
so that could be in psychology, a statistics course. Or
and we're still working on what it's going to be in English.
Yeah.
Yes, for the social sciences, it's statistics. For the scientists, they're already taking third and fourth math.
There's stuff in fields like computational linguistics that would fit quite nicely.
Well,
may not appeal to some of the people in the department.
Well, and they can work on something. One of them would be simply some quantification of searches, information retrieval. That might be something that they would be doing. And but the English department in recent years is developing very strongly in the area of technical writing, and so there might be something that'll come up there.
Interesting. Well, tell us a little bit more about the dean's job as it exists today. What are your major challenges? What kinds of work do you do? What are the rewards that you see?
Well, I think, as you said, when you're department chair, probably the most important thing was who you hired, and I think that always continues to be in a college. That it's the faculty you hire, the most important decisions you make, and the faculty that you retain by promoting and tenuring them. Those are.
And the dean does have some power when it comes to that.
He does.
You can always turn down a recommendation.
I can turn down a recommendation for hire, and I can turn down a recommendation for retention.
Have you done that much?
Not much.
At all?
Yes, at all.
I won't ask you for the details.
No, it happens. Obviously, I am very careful second guessing a department. I may ask them questions, but I'm going to be very reluctant to second guess their judgment.
Department chairs are important people.
Department chairs,
we know from experience, and you don't want to second guess them unless you have to.
No, and English faculty are ultimately the best people to decide who is a good English faculty member. But there is some oversight there, and the other is encouraging them to do thorough searches to make sure that things like affirmative action goals are considered. Interesting. So that's important. Obviously, budget has been a continuing issue in the last couple of years. The first year I was dean, we began having these rather draconian budget cuts. So managing that has been a big part of it. Moving this review of the Gen Ed requirement through, that took a lot of discussion and encouragement, and I actually spent a lot of time going to meetings, learning about how does one assess or try to assess a Gen Ed requirement. We're still working on that, particularly when you have, like we do, a rather smorgasbord way of approaching it. That is, you can meet the science requirement not by specific courses, but by a selection of courses in science, so there's no content way of checking the outcome. One of our goals is, well, they understand the scientific method and know how to understand things, and that's a difficult thing to get a handle on in an assessment. So we're struggling with that, and I think with our new way that North Central is going to be looking at us, we're making good progress toward being able to do that at a reasonable level. The other concerns are technology these days. I mean, keeping people up computers. Lately, keeping viruses out of the computers has been just a massive problem. So we spend a lot of time worrying about technology. And but for the first time, I'm actually seeing in a couple of areas where technology is saving us money. Our duplicating budget is about a third of what it was 3 years ago. Partly because everything can get posted on the net for students, and so we are. It's been a
and that's a big item.
It is a huge item, we asked the students if they'd be willing to pay a fee for materials, and they said no, they'd rather have it on the web and they'll print it out. Yeah. We said okay.
Okay. And they do pay a computer usage fee.
They do pay a computer fee, and that of course is greatly added what the students have.
Yeah.
In fact, for the most part, faculty get hand-me-downs from the student labs because we don't have fees to pay for faculty computers.
Well, you over the years, I think we've mentioned it earlier, but you've had an extremely strong research record.
Yeah.
And some would say that this is kind of a model for what the UNO professor ought to be like. How did you manage this at an institution that had primarily an undergraduate emphasis, even though in psychology we probably had more of a graduate emphasis than a lot of departments?
Well, a couple of ways. One, when I came here, I was given some time to do research, which at the time was not universal or general throughout UNO, but psychology had developed such a policy that faculty would be, who were active, would be assigned some of their time to do research. I was, in my area, in addition to time, you need equipment and supplies and things, and I was fortunate to get external grants, which made a huge difference in the ability to...
Well, you're probably understating that a little bit when you say you were fortunate. You wrote good proposals.
Oh, well, okay. They got funded. So that really helped me. And another one that I've always is I've had a good fortune, I think, and this is in many ways true, because I didn't necessarily recruit. In fact, the graduate students I recruited specifically from across the country did not particularly turn out very well. But I was fortunate to get some really good graduate students from while I was here, and these were everything from well, my first master's thesis student was a bootstrapper, and I don't know.
Bootstrappers were military people who were here to complete a degree.
And he was it was Hayden Sheets, and he was here as a bootstrapper, and he had 12 months to get his bachelor's degree, and he apparently had had quite a distinguished military career as an enlisted person before he was an officer, and so he had some clout, and he managed to say, well, if I can get another year, I can get a master's degree. And so they gave him the year.
Great.
Because they wanted him to teach at the Air Force Academy. And and he was very good. Then I had just a number of other really good graduate students, and that really bulks up your productivity when you have...
Maybe this is a good point to talk a little bit about your association with the University of Nebraska Medical Center. When you first came here, I was trying to stimulate relationships with the medical center because we had just become part of the same university, and I remember we got together fairly frequently for colloquia, discussion of research and so on. I presume that helped you too.
Oh yeah, those colloquia were great. And I think they were weekly.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'd have found time for that. But yeah, we had weekly colloquia and essentially presenting each other's research. They were very, very good. I've had interactions with numerous faculty over there. I spent a sabbatical year, one of my sabbatical years I spent in the anatomy department, and another sabbatical year I spent in the psychiatry department. And then I also worked half-time in the psychiatry department for a number of years. And all of that work was primarily research work? It was all research. Yeah. I taught very rarely, but I mean, I gave some lectures on, I think I gave, believe it or not, I gave statistics lectures to psychiatric residents, but Someone said when they heard I was giving a statistics lecture, he said, I guess in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, or something. So I did a little teaching, but it was primarily research.
Yeah. And I remember, well, looking at the resume you gave me before we met for this interview, you had page after page of pharmaceutical research that you did under grants from pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah. Well, those were things I participated in and really helped manage. And of course, one of the things they did was provide funding to do other research, because they were reasonably well paid. And I also developed another interest I developed over the years. I was one of the original members of the Institutional Review Board for the Protection of Human Subjects. That was a joint, well, at the time when it was first formed, it was for the entire university system. It continues to be for UNO and UNMC. And that has developed into a massive problem over the years of dealing with human
Well, I presume the problems at the medical center are much more difficult than the problems that you run into at UNO.
Yeah, the one problem that I was constantly have to represent for psychiatry is the use of placebos. Because a lot of people in medicine think that that's not ethical. And it's still debatable. And whether you can, by placebos, you randomly assign a patient to either get real experimental medication or nothing. But they don't know it and the like. And in psychiatry, I'm convinced you really cannot get a reasonable evaluation of a medication under any other circumstance, but with placebo control. And there's a lot of argument, and so I was always having to defend our protocols as to why we needed this placebo or why we needed that or that kind of thing. So I sort of was the psychiatry department's point person with the IRB, and then I also was, in doing these contracts, there's a lot of management and a lot of scientific stuff that has to be done, and I did a lot of that part too. And additionally, I was very good at drawing blood. So, since I'd done it on rats, people were no challenge.
So you were a qualified phlebotomist.
Well, I don't know how qualified, but when they couldn't get the blood, I was.
Okay. Well, I forgot to mention at some point along the line, we should mention it, that you were honored with named professorship, or at least you were a foundation professor for 6 years.
In the 1970s, I believe.
From 78 to 84.
That was very nice. And
you
it also
tell us what that means. A lot of people, I know what it means, but I'm sure a lot of people
it's an added stipend to your salary. And one of the things it allowed me to do, our sabbatical process is that you go on half salary if you want to take a year's sabbatical. Well, the stipend for the professorship actually stays whole while you're on sabbatical. So it allowed me to
helps you
to help me to do a full year sabbatical, which was good. And being rather conservative, the other thing I did was put most of it into my TIA craft, which I continue to appreciate at this point in my life.
And, well, in a few years from now, that'll pay off. Should mention, well, since we're talking about foundation professorship, this was given to you because of the distinguished work you were doing.
Research work, I think that one was based on research primarily.
And they just judged that you were the best qualified person.
That was very nice.
Well, one thing you've had extensive experience with, and I don't want to neglect, are your various service activities. And now we've mentioned that you served on this General Education Committee for our college. That's one major service activity. But and we mentioned, I think, just in passing, that you were on the Executive Graduate Council. But you served on search committees for the Dean of Business, for others. You were active in the UNO AAUP, American Association of University Professors, which serves as a collective bargaining agent for the faculty. You served several terms on the Faculty Senate. You were president of the Faculty Senate. So you want to tell us about some of these?
Well,
which do you think were the most? Well, you've already told me that you thought the general education was extremely interesting and useful, but how about some of the others?
Well, the Faculty Senate presidency was interesting. It was interesting. I remember meeting with Carl Camp when he was asking me if I'd be interested in doing it.
Dr. Camp has been interviewed in this series as well.
Yeah, he was then outgoing president.
Right.
And I said, oh, I'd certainly be flattered if people were interested. And so I agreed to stand for election. About 2 weeks after I was elected, we were, our chancellor then, Del Weber, Del announced he was retiring. And so the first item on the agenda was a search for a new chancellor. So it turned out to be quite a frantic time for the first year anyway, so dealing with a new chancellor who was feeling her own way around the campus, and I hope I was able to help her in that. There were a number of issues happening at the time, but it was a very interesting experience and sort of got me out of my laboratory and back into the whole UNO picture for a while. So that was and I did it for 2 years, so it was a very extensive and experience. I had many different stints on the Graduate Council. I always thought that was important work. I served on the college.
Tell me what the Graduate Council does.
Well, it oversees graduate programs and membership in the graduate faculty and things like that, and policies regarding.
And we mentioned this membership on the graduate faculty before, and I'm sure some of our audience doesn't know what that means.
Well, there used to be 2 levels. One was called just being a member of the graduate faculty, which required a terminal degree and like a PhD, and then some activity of scholarship in addition to that. And then there was something called graduate fellow status that required more extensive publications and essentially it gave you the privilege of supervising doctoral dissertations. We have now dropped that distinction, and partly, well, UNL, I think this was totally a UNL issue. I don't know why they wanted to drop it, but anyway, it was dropped. And so now it's, the whole thing is a little bit...
That's interesting. I didn't know that, and since I was mostly, the one that was mostly responsible for establishing those 2 categories back in the late 60s.
I don't know what partly of the issue was, particularly with the degree of turnover that's been happening in recent years, they wanted their new faculty to be able to immediately start supervising doctoral students. And
do you think that weakens or strengthens the faculty?
I don't know.
Or doesn't
probably what they were already doing was doing it, and someone else was signing. My guess. The point is that it's not automatic. The department has to agree for you to be on the graduate faculty.
They don't have anything like, originally they had something they called associate member, where you you could teach graduate courses.
Oh, we have that temporary things like now for 5 years you can teach graduate courses, but the issue was we'd settled the issue of teaching graduate courses fairly easily. People got a 5-year pass on that, but the critical issue was supervising doctors.
Now, did this come up when you were dean for graduate studies, or was
no? It came up after that. No, it came up.
Well, that's I'm not surprised at all, even though I hadn't known about it. But originally, it was a political decision, and so the politics of it have disappeared, and there's probably no real reason to do it anymore.
There's no political reason to do it anymore, I don't think.
Originally, UNO had a graduate faculty, and UNL had a graduate faculty, and the medical center did too, but since they were combined with UNL, it was the same thing. And it was a matter of UNO having less stringent requirements
to begin with,
and so we
took ours and put another layer on top.
Right, we took ours, but wasn't really another layer, because at UNL University of Nebraska-Lincoln, they had a category they called associate member.
Yeah.
And the associate member was roughly equivalent to our member, and so we made those two categories, and it worked out. It was a professor of sociology named Alan Bates, and he and I were a subcommittee of the graduate council, and we worked this out. And interestingly enough, I don't know whether I ever mentioned it to you, but we got the nomenclature came from the American Psychological Association. We had a member and fellow.
Sure, okay.
And I never, you know, I didn't attribute that to them or anything. We just did it.
Well, it's a lot of departments use that. Particularly the psychology department uses as one of their criteria in promotion and tenure. So they're having to rethink that and what they're going to set up as their criteria. So.
Well, we've talked a little bit about some of the changes that you've. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the service activities, because we just touched that a little bit. Let's talk about your activities with the AAUP. That was an important one too, I suspect.
Yeah, I was actually on the first. Why I was on. Ever thought that I could bargain, but anyway, I was on the bargaining committee that negotiated the first contract.
Back in 1983.
Is that when it was? Anyway, it was a fascinating process.
Yeah.
It's not one that I enjoyed at all. I do not like bluffing. I mean, what I wanted I was always, look, we're wasting our time asking for a $1 million raise. Let's just jump quickly to what's reasonable and save some time. But there's all this, so I did enjoy it, but it was fascinating to watch. But I never, I didn't enjoy coming in with a really big high demand and knowing that tomorrow we're going to cut it in half and things like that. Just like I hate buying cars. It's sort of the same idea. But it was a fascinating interaction. And I guess one of the things that I've learned since becoming a dean, when I talk to my colleagues, is that we have one of the more reasonable collective bargaining contracts in the nation, that it really allows the academic process to function about as reasonably as possible. In some of those contracts, the university is just really hamstrung.
Well, we felt our way along. I remember it quite well. And for a year, I was when I was acting vice chancellor for academic affairs. I served on that committee on the other side, and it worked very well. I think that year we had one of the better.
It can work well.
Easiest years.
Yeah, it can work well with there's sufficient money, and it works well in other ways. But as I said, I think it's one of the very reasonable ones, because I talked to colleagues at other places like UNO that are organized, and some of the things that they have to deal with. I mean, it's really a very reasonable contract.
Well, there are two other things that we might talk about. One is any significant changes other than the ones we've already talked about that you've seen in the university in the past since 1969, I guess. The other is your memories of specific people that kind of stood out. We've talked about a number of those as we've gone along here, but people that you worked with either at UNO or at the Med Center or even in central administration or student. Well, you mentioned one student in particular. Any.
Well,
whichever you'd like to do.
I'll quickly say in terms of how the place has changed. And sometimes, with 35 years, time and place get confounded. In many ways, we're a much smoother but much more bureaucratic place. I mean, when I tell people that my original promotion and tenure was done on a memo, they look at me in disbelief, because we have this, these tons of documentation that has to be, and a massive amount of information has to be accumulated. So I think we're a much more mature organization in that regard, and things are done and bureaucracy in both the good and bad sense of the word. I mean, we make fewer mistakes. I mean, I remember there were people that got tenure because somebody forgot that they'd been there 7 years, and those are the kind of things that I don't think can happen today. In terms of people, a couple of interesting people that stand out. One was Ron Roskins, who I have all sorts of different feelings about, but a fascinating guy in every sense of the word. When he was chancellor here, I kind of enjoyed what he did. I think he did a lot. And
he hired good people.
He hired Herb Garfinkel.
You just said Herb Garfinkel, right?
And he hired Herb Garfinkel,
one of my favorite people,
who had a huge impact on the academic growth of the institution, and a very dedicated guy. I mean, really a good academic and a good administrator.
And very fair, and he held my feet to the fire on a number of occasions when, on promotion and tenure particularly, but it was all good, and he did it well.
So I remember as administrators, I had a number of good colleagues here. Among those, Evan Brown was an interesting, fascinating person, a very frustrating person, but a lovable guy. Fran Hurst was one of the real senior people in the department, and I tended to sometimes think of him as an old fogey or things like that, but really there was a lot to Fran.
His field was school psychology, and he really set things up so that we had a well-developed program right from the start.
Fran knew what he was doing all the time, and was a really good person in the department, and things like that.
He did a lot for the university in a number of ways.
We still have
athletics and scholarships in all kinds of ways.
No, he was a good man. Those are some people that come to mind. There were a lot of colleagues over at the Med Center that I work with. Charlie Blake, he's not there anymore, and trying to think if there's any. We've always had good staff people here. Amazing, giving what we pay. They were able to give, and of course, Shirley, White was her name when I first, and then Shirley Petrowski, who was. That was the other thing. Not only did you become dean and leave the department, but then very shortly after that you took
secretary,
you took off, which was my whole way I was going to fake my way through being chair. But she was a. And then there was another person who, in the registrar's office, Jane
Kemp.
Those kind of people kept the university.
She was interviewed in this series.
Oh, was she?
Well, I'm being told that we're at the end here, so I've got to thank you, Shelton, and,
it was a pleasure.
wrap up. It's been fun. And to our audience, I want to thank you too for joining us today in a visit with Dean Shelton Hendricks, longtime faculty member in the Department of Psychology and currently Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at UN Omaha. We've been taking a look at some of the history of UN Omaha as seen through the eyes of the history makers. This is Jack Newton inviting you to join us again in the series we call Reflections in Time.
Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.